think the biggest thing that we had to do is really to go out in early March and April to figure out how do you deal with the variety of issues, temperature scanning, right? How do you deal with people on the shop floor that need to participate in meetings, but they couldn't? And we literally, before we could get all the GTACs deployed as well as the headsets, because we shifted platforms on radio communications and investigated a bunch of new standards and opportunities for us. It was really how do you provide safe hearing that allows conversations that would have occurred naturally to occur again in a physically distant, noisy production environment. This is not tin bashing, but it's still, you've got production and it's hard to hear. So we had to go out and investigate a variety of technologies, from thermal cameras to push-to-talk radio systems to headsets, and we settled in on Senseers and those GTAC devices, which Senseer kind of gives you 3 levels of communication. So one of the things is just the ability to have communications on the floor. It was interesting. We go with 8,000 employees. There's always a certain amount of inventory of laptops kind of rolling off of a 3-year life cycle and new ones coming in. So early on in COVID, I went back to our help desk and said, if I have depreciated assets that have 0 book value, I think I may want to get them out to the factory floors as soon as we possibly can. And because we knew the supply chain for these GTACs were 6 to 8 weeks out for us to even get them in. So we literally were taking notebooks that we normally donate to schools or to other charitable locations. We basically brought them back into the manufacturing facilities, and I hate to say, it was one of those things that we had to put $60 worth of Microsoft licensing on it. And if somebody stepped on it, dropped it, ran it over, stuck a forklift through it, it was a fully depreciated asset, and we could reclaim that license and move it elsewhere. So it wasn't a financial impact to us. It wasn't the latest and greatest technology, but it did help bridge that gap. So that's kind of the speed and flexibility of thinking outside of the box of how do you keep those, like a Teams meeting going. When you do the daily direction setting, it used to get people get in a room, but you can't do that with COVID, right? You can't jam production floor area, 15 to 20 people into a small tight quarters like we used to. So they allowed them to have that capability. It allowed the PEs and the technicians to have, that, factory floor access, which is where, we migrated now to using the GTACs, and in some of our high priority locations, both in the consumer business, think Uncrustables, as well as in our coffee and pet businesses, the high volume locations, they're using those tools more and more often. They're buying more of them. I think we put an initial order in. Our vendor has 100 in inventory so that we eliminate that supply chain challenge, because as soon as we put an order, instead of waiting 6 weeks, we get it within a week. And then we image them and deploy them out to the location. So that's, I think, one of the more interesting ones. And then just the simple thing of how do you deal with doing the thermal scanning for 5,500 employees that go to work every day? Like the 3 of us, we're sitting at our homes, right? We're not going in. We go to work, but we don't physically go to work. But we do that where if you exit the facility, you enter or exit. I guess it's not exit, but when you come back, you get thermal scanned. And we're looking at everything from, we currently a lot of the sites are still using third party nurses and EMTs to do the scanning, but we're also putting in infrared FLIR cameras so that people can walk through a kind of a kiosk area, have their temperature taken, and kind of continue to proceed through. The interesting dynamic of that, right? If you think about what it's doing, is it's taking a live video feed of a person capturing the temperature at their tear ducts, identifying whether you're at an elevated temperature or not. You get into a huge PII, HIPAA, all this stuff that February, called Valentine's Day, nobody was thinking about how do I take somebody's temperature and not associate it that John has an elevated temperature, but prevent John from entering a facility or divert him to a secondary scanning location to verify, hey, did you just have the heater cranked up too high in your car? Or in our southern states, was it just 110 degrees and you're still cooling off from getting out of a high temperature area. So a lot of complexities about making sure that we have the right levels of preventative capability to keep our employees healthy, and all that has fed into changing in it's days and minutes rather than weeks and months that we had to react and respond to it. So, and we're still evolving. With any consumer foods, right, our demand has gone through the roof because consumer behavior has changed, right? You can look out and see the dramatic shift of kind of the e-commerce, right? Even I did it today. I clicked on the grocery cart, had it come in. It didn't come to the house because I live out in the country, but I did the drive into the local Walmart, full end, couple buggies of how do you feed a family of 6, load into the back of the family truckster, and you come home. That wasn't John Baier in February. It was my wife and I would go, we would browse. Now we literally browse on our Apple devices and place the order. That has shifted. If you just look at any of the common press, there's a huge shift of, Amazon's going up. Traditional Walmart is actually sliding a little bit. The in-store Walmart volume is going down, but the Walmart to go, the Walmart, they're actually delivering even out in my area of all places, where that didn't exist 6 months ago. So consumer behavior has changed in terms of how they purchase. It has also changed on what they're purchasing. So some of the innovation, the unique products that were on the cutting edges, people are falling back to the traditional products, the comfort foods, the things that you're familiar with, the things that hey, when I get strawberry preserves or grape jelly, it's going to be what I remembered. And when I have a peanut butter and jelly with Jif, it's going to be the same consistency of what I'm experiencing. And I'm not willing with all the other things to have something unknown. So you do see a change in consumer behavior that's driving volume. If you look at, I'll pick on not JMS. Look at Coca-Cola. They've cut on their SKUs, I think it was 200 different soda products, and they've shifted their production permanently. It's no longer we're going to make 400 some odd flavors of soda. We're going to make the 200 core, and we're going to invest deeper into the snacking. Very public knowledge now, we just sold off the last component of our baking business. Right? We sold off Crisco. We're in the midst of selling it off. That's shifting us once again away from what consumers were no longer demanding in high volume to the snacking, right? So our high volume facilities that deal with snacks, they're dealing with a demand that we believe is going to be more permanent than what our baking business was providing us. So I think if you look at the trends in the consumer behavior, it's changed what we've had to react and respond to. So you circle back to how do I get better information to the floor and enable that supply chain as we see changing patterns, that information, that time from the demand stream being initiated all the way down to a production order hitting the floor and all the supply chain activities that have to go, that is being compressed. We know we can crank out as many sandwiches as we possibly can make because the demand is so great, our supply can't reach to the levels that we have. But we're seeing that across other products as well. So it's just really the tighter we can go from the forecast to the sales delivery cycle, the better it is. And that's really where the communications and the speed of communications and the ability for the area leads to have their ability to identify how do I motivate my team to hit the high level of RE and attainment that's necessary to meet the demands, right? And still produce quality product at the volume that we need to. That's where we've had to kind of do everything we can to compress that cycle. If you look at where we're at, we're early on in that stage, but the excitement around Ops Hub and its capabilities is really starting to build. And I know that once we get through this fiscal year, we'll have basically the coffee business completely enabled with Ops Hub. We'll have about 50% of the pet business enabled with it. And consumer will be a much longer journey just because of the sheer volume and the number of plants. But they're all seeing, that positive impact of having that communications and that ability to be very directive with screens, with information. And the interesting thing is we're not changing the classic view of what the operators are interacting with. We're providing that visual data visualization to the floor. But what the operators are familiar with, because the last thing we want to do is upset 5,500 people that have gone to work every day since March 13th with, hey, you got to learn how to do Proficy in the web. So the nice thing about where we're at is we can do the classic view, and then some of those more knowledgeable workers are able to use some of the newer screens that they want to go develop within Ops Hub. So it's been fairly beneficial to have that capability for us. So the rollout strategy, what we're actually doing is we're literally going after the priority sites. So those sites that are the highest volume, so our handheld business, or the Uncrustables, right? We did Scottsville as the pilot. Longmont is in the midst of construction right now, of course, basically another 100% expansion. We've got to have that facility upgraded before our fiscal year ends. For the simple nature, they're going to add another 200 to 300 employees out there. So we want to get all of those employees on the latest version. And what Ops Hub is going to provide in both of those locations is that common platform for communications and visual data representation. It's the downtime. It's the normal things you'd want to put out there. It's your production, your attainment. What's the last 3 issues that you're facing? What's the most common issues you're facing? So that when an event occurs, it's not that you're looking at that machine. You might be looking upstream or downstream that either the fillers aren't working right or the packers aren't working right. And so it's how do you provide them that information so they know what to do sooner than, if you think about the telephone tag that exists today, where if an upstream or a downstream event occurs, if the communication isn't there or if it isn't visually represented, it's much more difficult in a COVID environment to have that face-to-face communication, right? It goes back to the ability to communicate. So if we can communicate visually, that's where the people are seeing the excitement about it. Getting more information to the floor. I think they went out and bought 25 or so large format displays. So think about 75-inch monitors, TVs, right? Industrial TVs to go out on the floor. Same thing out in Longmont. Remember when they're going through the acquisition of the equipment, kind of approval, the plant manager was asking, well, why do I need, because he saw TVs, why do I need, is this going to be like the best sports bar in the area? Well, it's how do we have all these monitors within eyesight? So if I'm working with you guys right now, I think in my office, I actually have not a large format display, but I have a display, 8 feet away from me. And it's how do you have that information flowing to you so you can actually react and respond to it? And I think that's where we're seeing is that enablement, the capabilities that we want to then integrate, which is I have the normal display that's a rotating, here's the attainment, here's what's coming on production line, so they can prepare not only what they're making, but what are they making, the next shift. But also, you think about it from an area leader, you walk into an area and you want to make a quick, on the floor call. We're really starting to push hard is how do I have that casting ability to where either I have an iPhone where I want to cast a quick presentation, or I have one of those GTAC devices, I can cast it up to that format, and people with their headsets can actually hear and converse on what do we need to do? What's that huddle that we can't physically huddle anymore? If I think about the last 4+ years I've been working with you guys, and the company's been working with you guys for 15+ I think at this time. As we mature with our capability, you guys are kind of lockstep with us on that. We traditionally have used you guys for one, augmentation of knowledge, but also kind of skill augmentation of how do we bring in, and I'll pick on the work that we're doing with Ops Hub, right? You guys are able to key up, Greg Hazel with us, where that's infusing that knowledge into our teams, because there's not one Greg, there's one Greg Hazel, there's ultimately not going to be 24, but we're going to create 24 Greg Hazel types, at all of our locations. So that partnership, that relationship, not only doing the work, but being those architects, being those trainers on both what we're experiencing now with Ops Hub, but also just as importantly, as we've just had over the last 15 years in and around Plan Apps, is one of the reasons why it's been such a rewarding and easier relationship with you guys. We know that the consistency, we know the quality. It's no different than when I go buy, the cans of peanut butter, right? One boy likes creamy, the other ones like crunchy, and we know consistently the Jif products are going to be the same and meet our same high standards and expectations. So that, I think, is one of the reassuring things, that we've got the right partners. One, we know what we're going to get, and when we need the peanut butter, it's going to be consistent. When we need to have that innovation of, well, what do you do with peanut butter above and beyond making peanut butter and jellies? You guys are going to come to the table with better, cases. How can you use this? You're constantly poking us to say, hey, have you thought about, right? And we had that conversation here, I think it was a week ago, with Carson early on, which is kind of the twin threads. And don't forget about these things that are maybe slightly beyond or over the horizon that you're not seeing. So I think it's that combination of, you're able to help us execute the day-to-day, but you're also providing us capabilities that we can see, but also saying, here's what's around the corner. Don't forget to look around the corner or over the horizon. I think that's where, as we start to think about, as we mature for the next, 3 to 5 years, the around the corner and over the horizon type relationship is really what's going to drive the relationship to a deeper level. And that's really kind of what Carson was getting at with us the other day, which is, yeah, it's great that you can, project RE and do those shop floor things, but how do I have that smart manufacturing, I hate to use that word, that end-to-end environment, right? There's a vision in one of our senior leaders of, how can I have end-to-end visibility that cuts across the supply chain, that cuts across the manufacturing, that cuts across maintenance and reliability. So I have a totally predictive, engine that I can adjust when I start to tweak demand models and understand, well, what's the implications? How do I make the best decisions? Rather than, you think about our demand teams now, they kind of have to throw the orders in and see what happens, right? Think about the modeling we'll be able to do, right? Think about the tweaking on the front end supply chain for raw materials coming in, changing of the demand, the efficiency that we can have there to reduce the working capital of inventory, as well as making sure we're producing more product in any given period to meet the customer demand and not have inventory, staged. That's a pretty awesome capability. Now, will we see it in the next 5 years? I don't know, but that's at least some stretch goals that we're starting to get pushed on. Is how do you really have that complete integration and kind of that scenario building, that, boy, what if, right? Run those what if scenarios.